morning and welcome to the Carrie Barrett Show live. I apologize. I don't like to be distracted as soon as I'm starting a live stream, but I realized I forgot to start my phone recording this for my YouTube channel. So let me get that going. There we go. And now I'm back with you. Thank you once again for joining me for the Carrie Barrett Show live. If you are joining for the first time, this is a live stream that simulcasts on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. What are the other ones? LinkedIn. And then I repurpose the content as an audio podcast as well. So if you miss these live streams, I'd love to have you subscribe and download the Carrie Barrett Show audio podcast as well. I'll put a link to that in the comments. So today we're talking a little bit about the types of media interviews, if you decide you want to put yourself out there and go for it, that you will generally stumble across. Before we get to that though, I want to touch on something. I've started talking a little bit more about media training and PR, publicity coaching in my content. And ever since I've done that, I've had a number of PR agencies, and I'm putting them in air quotes because in my opinion, they may brand themselves as a PR agency, but they are, in their DMs, guaranteeing PR coverage, media coverage. And I'm here to tell you, if anybody ever shows up in your DMs or emails you and guarantees you media coverage, they are promising either something that is completely different than what you are expecting, i.e. an appearance on your neighbors, sisters, friends, cousins podcast that gets, one listener a week, or they're talking about pay to play. I'm going to actually dive into that in next week's episode because I think it is something that happens. I know, in fact, it's something that happens all the time and people buy into it, but it is absolutely false advertising. In fact, I just had a conversation with somebody about that in my DMs yesterday. We'll talk about that at a later time. All right, so let's dive into the 4 types of media interviews that you would be likely to come across or be presented with if, in fact, you started pursuing media opportunities as a way to grow your personal brand or get eyeballs on your business, up level your credibility or your status, your visibility, that sort of stuff. There's really 4 main types. And I want to be clear. Pursuing media is not necessarily a means to an end, or not necessarily the end game is what I'm trying to say. I have a client right now who we're doing media training, and this client is landing national and local media, TV, digital outlets, et cetera, et cetera. This particular client, her main goal is not just exposure via media. She is trying to grow a speaking business. She is growing her speaking business. And the quickest way, one of the quickest ways to go from being able to charge, $1,000 for a speaking engagement to $10,000 for a speaking engagement is to be able to say, as seen on NBC, the Wall Street Journal, the Drew Barrymore Show, whatever it is. So she's using her media appearances as a way to establish credibility and visibility, to create demand for her speaking services, and also to be able to increase her speaking fees. So keep that in mind. Talking about media appearances is not necessarily the end game. It may be a step to getting you where you want to go. All right. Back to the 4 types of interviews that you might find yourself presented with should you decide to pursue media opportunities. And if you have a question, go ahead and drop them in the comments. And if you're listening to this on the audio podcast, please reach out via my website, carriebarrett.com, or on LinkedIn. The first type of interview that you are likely to be presented with, and this is really one of the easiest, it is a written interview. So it would likely be for some sort of digital or print publication, whether it's a be a blog. It could be, heck, it could be the New York Times. It could be Medium. It could be anything like that. And they will give you a series of questions. Again, it depends on your topic. It depends on how many words they're looking to put in this particular article or whatever it is, as to how many questions they might give you, how much background information they already have. But you will literally answer, via email, send them back, and then they'll work that interview into their article or their publication or whatever it is that's coming out on the other side. There's a few things that make this an easier interview. Number one is you really have time to dive into what exactly it is you want to say, right? Your headline, your soundbite, the supporting information. And you have time to be very deliberate and intentional with your words. It also has the least likely chance of you being misquoted. And that's because literally they're pulling pieces of your interview and they're working them into, again, whatever's coming out on the other side. Now, that's not to say that every single part of your answer will be included in their article. So there's a real good chance that pieces will be not included, but there is a very unlikely chance of your comments, answers, thoughts being misconstrued. The second type of interview that you would likely come across as you are pursuing media opportunities is a phone interview. Basically, it'll be similar line of questioning usually, but you will do it over the phone. This type of interview can be used for radio, it can be used for podcasts, and it can be used for digital and print publications as well. The nice thing about it is that your audience potentially has the chance to hear your voice and make a deeper connection with you in that way. The downside of this particular type of interview is that it does require a little more prep. It's not live generally, unless you are interviewing live on a radio show or a live stream, for example. But because it's not live, you will also have, whoever is the reporter, the interviewer, there's a chance that they'll pull out pieces of your answer and use that to construct, again, whatever is the output on the other side, a news story, a print article, some sort of radio story. So there is a chance that something you say could be misconstrued. And you also don't have the opportunity to be quite as deliberate with your words generally. That's not to say you shouldn't plan. You should absolutely plan. You should suggest questions to the interviewer. You should have your 3 main talking points. You should know what your soundbite is, what your headlines are, and what your supporting information is. And you should sort of drive back to those 3 in every single question that you are asked. But because you're speaking still somewhat extemporaneously, sort of off the cuff, if you will, right, there's a chance that what you say won't come out exactly as you wanted. That's just part and parcel of any sort of live interview, any sort of audio interview, or certainly any sort of interview that takes place on a camera. Which leads me to the next type of interview, and that is an interview that happens on camera. So generally speaking, this will be an interview that is used for a video podcast, a live stream like this one, or a television or cable type outlet or network. There's a couple of different types of interviews that can happen in that particular format, in the video format. I'm just going to say video format. One is live and one is live to tape. So for example, what I'm doing right now is live. What I did on NBC News last week was live, meaning it was not recorded. It was going out as I was speaking. Live to tape can be an interview that's done via Zoom. It can be an interview that is done on location. It can be an interview that is done in a studio, but that it is recorded. That type of interview can either be then released, if you will, as an interview segment, as a Q&A segment. So, let's say your interview is 5 minutes, right? From front to back, 5 minutes unedited as it is. It can also be edited so that your interview questions are part of a prepackaged piece. In the news world, they would call that a package. Basically, it means it's your sound bites pulled from that interview, and then it's interspersed generally, not always, but usually with either anchor or reporter audio, meaning they're giving some more details with their own voice, and then B-roll, which is the video that accompanies it, background video of, let's say the opening of your new restaurant or whatever it is that you're on the lens to talk about. So video interviews happen both as live interviews and they happen as live to tape or recorded. They can also happen either in studio, meaning you are, for example, again, I hate to keep drawing on this, but going back to last week on NBC News, right, I was at 30 Rock. I was in the studio. And so they can happen that way. They can happen via a platform like Zoom, for example, or StreamYard or Riverside or VidX, or they can happen on location. So meaning you might have somebody, let's use the restaurant example, come out to your restaurant and record an interview there or do a live interview there for a morning show or for something like that, right? So there's actually many more elements that can be used when you're doing a video type interview. I hope this all makes sense. Again, if you have questions, please drop them in the comments because it's a lot to take in, especially as it relates to video, which is really my area of expertise. It's my background in the news industry. And so the great thing about video is, number one, your audience gets to have a much deeper connection with you because it is face and it is voice. If you are in studio, you as the interviewee have an opportunity to really fully leverage that in-person interview to create a connection with the hosts or the producers or the bookers or whoever it is that's talking to you so that you can pitch yourself more easily for future segments down the road because you have a connection. The challenge, and this is where most people get really caught up. In fact, I had someone mention on one of my posts yesterday that the idea of even going live on any sort of media platform was terrifying, is that it is in fact live. And it's not a live stream perhaps like this. It's a live stream that, on a large network is maybe going out to millions of people, or certainly hundreds of thousands. And so your nerves are kicked up a notch, especially if you are in a studio environment that you're unfamiliar with. And you have the opportunity to speak again extemporaneously, which is sort of raw and brings your audience in, but it means there's a chance that you are, words, and much like they're happening for me right now, you don't iterate things exactly the way that you want to. So those types of interviews take significantly more prep for most people, meaning you are thinking about, not just the questions that you prepped the hosts to ask you, right? I always list a series of questions that are suggested questions when I send a pitch to media. I don't know that I've ever had any of those questions asked. And when I was pitched when I was, working in the news and I was given a list of suggested questions at 20 years, I maybe use those questions 3 times. They're very rarely used. I offer them anyway, because it makes things easier if they do choose them. But anyway, my point in all of that is you want to be prepared for those questions, and anything else that you think the anchors or the host or the reporter may potentially ask you. And in fact, I went through my process a little bit last week as I was prepping for my interview, talking about, these are my 5 talking points. These are my additional 5 suggested questions. And with each one, I created a headline, I created a soundbite, and then I created in sort of an inverted pyramid format the additional supporting and nice to know information. And I rehearsed them and I rehearsed them and I rehearsed them and I rehearsed them. I didn't memorize them, but I practiced speaking them. That's key. I wouldn't memorize if I were you, if you're doing this sort of interview, because what that means is you have a tendency to sound rehearsed, which totally kills like the greatest opportunity that being in front of the camera gives you, which is the opportunity to be very conversational and create a connection. And if you sound rehearsed, you kill that. And oh, by the way, if you forget what you're saying, it's much more harder. It's much more difficult to pick back up where you left off and get back on the right path. So rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Do not memorize. All right. So you've got these 4 basic interviews, and I'm going to go over them again, let you know where you're likely to find them. So a email interview in which you are answering questions that either you have suggested, the interviewer would like to ask, or a combination of the 2. It is the most low risk, low stakes opportunity. And the benefits are it's low risk and low stakes. The cons of that are that it doesn't allow you to make as deep of a connection as you potentially could. That is going to be used in a blog, in an online or print publication, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. It could also potentially be used on some of the digital real estate for television or cable news. So there are, for example, more articles and interviews on foxnews.com than there are being broadcast on Fox News or CNBC or MSNBC or whatever, NBC, etc. Right. So that's the first kind. Second kind is an audio interview, will be done likely over the phone. Those interviews can be used in all of the publications that I mentioned previously, but also for podcasts and also for radio. Potentially, an audio interview could be used on television or cable news. That is only if they absolutely need a soundbite and for whatever reason, they cannot get you in the studio or they can't do something via Zoom. It is highly unlikely to happen that way, but it does occasionally. The benefits: your audience hears your voice usually and is able to establish a deeper connection there. You're actually speaking with the host, so you're able to create a deeper connection there, which helps you leverage that platform for additional opportunities. And again, the cons are because you are speaking off the cuff with preparation, but still off the cuff, there's a chance that what you say doesn't come out exactly as you want it to, and that you are potentially misconstrued. And I'm going to actually push back. I'm going to offer some counter to that point at the end. And then finally, you have your on-camera interviews. And I mentioned there are 4 different kinds of media interviews. That's because your on-camera can happen either live or it can happen recorded. It can happen in the studio or on location, or it can happen via Zoom. The benefits there are that you establish a greater connection with your audience because they can see your face, they can get an idea of your personality, they can hear your voice. Maybe you have a chance to demo something if you're a fitness instructor, and so you can really show a new type of yoga or something like that. And you get to fully leverage the experience with the host, again, for additional opportunities potentially down the road. And once again, the con is that this is something that is a little bit more spontaneous and extemporaneous. meaning that your words may not come out exactly as you had hoped. You may miss a point or two. You may not use the soundbite you want. You may miss an opportunity there. That said, this really is, in front of the camera, the greatest opportunity for you to make a connection. It allows you, things can be transcribed for print and digital publications. They can be transcribed for radio. They can be transcribed for blogs. It also gives you the opportunity to potentially get on major network TV and talk about whatever it is that you're talking about in front of a massive, massive audience, which is huge for, of course, credibility and visibility, and certainly status among your clients and your industry peers as well. Now, about the potential to be misquoted or misconstrued. And certainly there is a little bit of media negativity, perhaps is the word, or mistrust is perhaps a better word. And people do ask me if I think that fake news is a thing. I do not believe fake news is a thing unless it applies to stuff like the election was stolen. Yes, that is fake news, but there's no mainstream media really that's pushing that narrative. If you say something, and let me backtrack. Sorry, this is confusing. You may do a 15-minute recorded interview. That interview is going to be put into a video story, perhaps, or a news story that is going to be 75 seconds long. You are going to be taken out of context. There's no way you can fit all the context of a 15-minute interview into a 75-second news piece that also has to have reporter track and an anchor intro and everything else. Okay, so by its very nature, you will be taken out of context. What you need to make sure is that every standalone thing you say can be pulled out and used without you saying, oh my gosh, that's not what I meant. So if you say, my company doesn't suck, blah, 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 and the news organization chooses to pull out the sound bite and play it over and over and over again of you saying my company doesn't suck. I don't know, let's say you've been in some sort of controversy, right? That's the sound bite. That's the thing they're going to use because it is interesting. What is this person talking about? Why does their company suck? Because you're on the defense. Technically, are you being taken out of context? Yeah, but you said the words and they're a standalone sentence. So the onus is on you as the subject matter expert, the business owner, whatever it is, to make sure that any standalone soundbite that you speak can be used and doesn't corrupt the meaning of what you are trying to say. Because in that case, yeah, my company doesn't suck, along with some horrified facial expression, that makes a great tease. That's how they're going to bring in viewers. So yes, out of context, but you actually did say it, and you said it as a standalone sentence, which means it is absolutely usable and ethical for the media organization to use it if you're, going by the letter of the law. Right. So a little bit of pushback there on things being taken out of context. I do not believe, I've never come across in my life, and I've worked at right-leaning media organizations and I've worked at left-leaning media organizations. I've never come across a journalist, an anchor, a reporter, a producer who has ever encouraged, either implicitly or explicitly, someone to deliberately misconstrue what someone is saying. Might they play something up because it sounds controversial? Absolutely. But to deliberately misconstrue or misunderstand, that doesn't happen. at least not in my experience, in my 2 decades of experience all over the country, and again, left and right. So be aware that the onus is on you as the subject matter expert to make sure that what you're saying makes sense from beginning to end, and that nothing can be used extemporaneously or out of a standalone comment that misconstrues or eliminates some of the context of what you are trying to say. So I hope you found this helpful for different kinds of media interviews. If you are interested in grabbing the pitch framework that I use to pitch myself and my clients for some of the media opportunities, in fact, the framework that I use to create my pitch for NBC News, and in fact, the template that I used for that exact pitch, the one that got me booked on NBC News, you can grab it here, carriebarrett.com/the pitch perfect framework. You can also go to my website. And if you're interested in setting up a strategy call, you can click the link in the comments as well, the Perfect Pitch Media Master Strategy Call. And if you're listening to this on the audio version of the podcast, you can find the links to that in the show notes. As a reminder, next week on the Carrie Barrett Show Live, we are going to be talking about why you absolutely cannot trust anybody who slides into your inbox or into your DMs and tells you that with one low payment of blah, 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 they will guarantee you media coverage. Again, it happens to me, even with my background in the media and understanding how it works. And they prey on people who don't understand how media works. Here's the hint. Nobody can guarantee coverage. You can be in the studio 30 seconds away from your interview, and if there's breaking news, that interview's over, and there's a real good chance it's not coming back. Anybody who guarantees you media exposure is lying, or at least being insanely disingenuous. So we're going to talk about that coming up next week on the Carrie Barrett Show Live. In the meantime, thank you for joining me. Have a fantastic Thursday, and I'll see you back here, same time, same place next week.